The arena floated in the black of space like a living star, its walls made of shining crystal and its towers pulsing with alien fire. Billions of eyes across the galaxy were locked on this place, watching through massive screens that hung in orbit above their worlds or streamed into the crowded halls of war councils and city markets. The Galactic Tournament was not just a sport, not just entertainment. It was a warning, a reminder of power. And tonight, the most feared warrior of them all had stepped into the circle. The weapons master stood tall, his armor forged from 1,000 broken enemies, his name whispered like thunder in the darkest corners of the galaxy. He was a living legend, undefeated, and every duel he fought ended the same way, his enemy broken, his strike final, his reputation unshaken. He carried weapons that were more than machines, more than tools of destruction. They were like living storms, bound to his command, and each was said to hold the power to split a world in two. The galaxy knew one thing: when the master decided to end a fight, there was no survival. Across from him stood a figure so small, so fragile, that many in the crowd laughed when she first walked into the arena. She was human, one of the lesser species, a woman whose name was not even known to the spectators filling the galactic feeds. Her frame was thin, her clothing simple, her expression calm in a place where fear was the only reasonable emotion. The aliens watching hissed and muttered in disbelief. Some shouted that the match was unfair. Others laughed that the master had wasted his time. And many turned away for a moment, thinking they had already seen the end. To them, this human woman was nothing, an insect before a storm. Her life would be measured in seconds, gone before most could even blink. The air in the arena grew heavier as the master raised his hand. The weapon appeared out of nothing, summoned by his will. It was a spear of burning light, wrapped in coils of shadow and flame, its edges bending the air as if the universe itself feared to touch it. It was said to pierce planets, to tear through the walls of great fortresses, to erase fleets from the sky. And now it was aimed at one single human. The silence stretched as his eyes locked on her. Around the galaxy, entire worlds leaned forward, waiting for the strike. The energy of the weapon screamed through the arena, and the crowd trembled as if their own skin would burn from its power. This was the deadliest weapon of the deadliest warrior. No one could survive it. He moved. The strike was launched. It flew faster than thought, a glowing spear tearing through space like a star on fire. The arena shook with its force. The ground cracked. Even the cameras struggled to follow its path. In the markets of distant worlds, people screamed. In the halls of empires, leaders clenched their fists, knowing they had just witnessed a death. Every living being watching believed it was over. But the woman did not move. She did not cry out. She did not fall to her knees in fear. Her eyes stayed calm, her breathing steady, her stance unbroken. As the weapon closed in, her hand rose, slow, steady, as if she were reaching for nothing more dangerous than a falling leaf. The weapon roared, its fire screaming against the silence. The masters of war watching leaned closer to their screens. The crowd inside the arena shouted as one, a thunder of voices echoing off the walls. And then, the impossible happened. The human's hand closed around the weapon. She caught it in midair, her fingers wrapping around its burning light. The fire that had destroyed armies bent against her palm and stopped. The weapon froze, locked in her grasp as if time itself had surrendered to her will. There was no fear in her eyes, no pain in her face. Only calm. Only certainty. The arena went silent. The noise died in a heartbeat, replaced by a silence so deep it pressed against the chest like a weight. The crowd of billions across the galaxy froze in disbelief. Leaders who had ruled for centuries leaned back in their chairs with wide eyes. The master himself stepped back, the certainty of his power breaking like glass beneath a hammer. For the first time in living memory, his weapon had been stopped. For the first time, fear passed through his own eyes. The silence stretched on, endless, as the woman stood there, still holding the weapon as if it were nothing more than a stick of wood pulled from a fire. She did not look at the weapon. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at the master, her gaze calm, steady, unbroken. The message was clear without words. She was not afraid. And in that moment, the galaxy realized something it had never believed possible. The weapons master had launched his deadliest strike, and a human, a species most considered weak, broken, fragile, had caught it without fear. A legend was born in that silence. A legend that would echo far beyond the walls of the arena, a legend that would shatter the balance of power across the stars. The era of human defiance had begun. The weapon was still in her hand, its glow trapped, its fire caged. The crowd did not cheer. They did not breathe. The entire galaxy, spread across thousands of worlds, sat frozen in a silence so deep it felt like the stars themselves had stopped shining. The weapon's master, a warrior who had destroyed fleets and crushed champions without effort, stared at the human woman as if he was seeing something that should not exist. His hand trembled, the command signals he sent to his weapon meeting resistance for the first time in his life. He pulled, he ordered, he demanded the weapon return to him, but it did not move. It stayed in her grip, still alive with fire, but chained by her strength. Whispers spread inside the arena, soft at first, like the rustle of wind in dry leaves. "Impossible," hissed one alien voice. "She cannot, she should not," another muttered. Across the galaxy, those whispers grew louder. On a mining world near the edge of the spiral arm, workers stopped their machines to watch. In the golden towers of a ruling council, ministers leaned close to one another in shock. No one had ever seen the master's weapon fail. No one had ever believed it could be stopped. And now a single human, nameless and unarmed, had done it with nothing more than her hand. The master's fury rose, his chest heaving, his voice breaking the silence with a roar. "Again," he thundered, his voice echoing like thunder across the arena walls. He raised his other hand, calling forth a second weapon, one forged from shadow and ice, a blade that had cut through the armor of living gods. He hurled it forward with rage, the arena shaking as the blade sliced the air apart. The woman did not flinch. The crowd gasped, expecting her to fall at last. But as the blade reached her, she stepped aside with calm ease, as if she had been waiting for it. The weapon stabbed into the ground, carving deep scars in the crystal floor, sparks rising into the air. The woman stood still, the first weapon still in her hand, the second lying useless at her feet. Her face showed no pride, no fear, no anger. Only calm. The whispers grew into shouts. In the great viewing halls of distant worlds, alien voices rose in argument. Some cried that she was cheating, that no human could hold such strength. Others claimed she had unlocked a power forgotten by history. And some, the quiet ones, felt a creeping chill in their bones. If one human could stand against the master, what would happen if there were more like her? The master's fury deepened, his pride burning like a star about to explode. He circled her now, his weapons glowing and shifting around him, a storm of fire, ice, lightning, and smoke. He unleashed them all, wave after wave of destruction, each strike loud enough to shake the arena itself. Weapons that had broken armies filled the air, shining and screaming as they fell upon her. And still, she moved with calm. She caught one, broke another, stepped through the fire as if it were rain. She raised her hand and dissolved the storm of lightning into nothing but sparks. She lifted her foot and shattered the ground weapon as if it were glass. Her body moved slow, steady, precise, as though she had been trained by the universe itself. The crowd gasped again, their voices rising in disbelief, but still they did not cheer. Fear had taken the place of wonder. Every alien watching understood this moment was no longer just a duel, no longer entertainment. It was revelation. If the master could not defeat her, if his weapons could be stopped, then the galaxy itself was not as safe as they believed. The humans, once seen as weak, might be something else. Something dangerous. Something hidden. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but carried through the arena by unseen power. "You fight for pride," she said, her eyes locked on the master. "I fight for survival. That is why I will not fall." Her words spread like fire through the audience. Survival. The humans had always been survivors, rising from a world scarred by wars, storms, hunger, and fire. Perhaps that was their weapon, sharper than any blade, stronger than any storm. The crowd whispered her words again and again. Survival. The master's hand shook now, his rage fighting against the chill crawling into his heart. He had never known fear, but in this moment, staring at her calm eyes, he felt it. The galaxy's champion, the undefeated, the legend of legends, was beginning to doubt. His strikes had failed. His power was resisted. His certainty was broken. And before him stood a human woman who refused to die, who refused even to bow. The silence returned, heavy, endless, as the woman lowered the captured weapon to her side and let it fall to the ground with a soft thud. The sound echoed louder than thunder, louder than screams, because in that moment it was not a weapon falling, it was the collapse of certainty, the end of fear as it had been known. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the next move, their hearts frozen between awe and terror. And so the duel did not end. It grew deeper, darker. The galaxy's strongest warrior had been challenged, not by another legend, not by a god or an emperor, but by a single human. And as the silence spread across the stars, one truth rose higher than all others. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and the price of that mistake was only beginning to be revealed. The weapons master stood surrounded by the wreckage of his own fury. The arena floor was cracked and smoking, the walls of crystal burned black by the storm of weapons he had unleashed. Yet the human woman remained. She stood calm in the center of the destruction, untouched by fire, unbroken by steel, her eyes locked on him with the same steady gaze that had begun to haunt his mind. She looked not like a warrior, not like a conqueror, but like someone who had seen death many times before and had learned not to fear it. The crowd was restless now, their silence replaced with whispers that echoed like waves in the vast chamber. Billions across the galaxy spoke the same words. How can this be? How can she stand? What is she? The masters of council chambers argued, the generals of armies leaned forward with narrowed eyes, and the rulers of empires clenched their fists. None of them understood. Humans had been weak, broken, scattered across their small planet. They were not known as soldiers. They were not known as gods. And yet this one woman stood against the greatest warrior of the galaxy and refused to fall. The master tried to hide the tremor in his hands as he drew forth a new weapon. This one was not fire, nor steel, nor lightning. It was something darker, forged from the shadows of dead stars, a chain that bound the very essence of a soul. With a roar, he hurled it forward, the black links spinning, screaming, hungering for flesh. The chain wrapped around her, striking her arms, her body, her throat. The crowd gasped, thinking at last the end had come. But her hands rose, and with a single pull she snapped the chain apart. The fragments fell at her feet like dust, fading into smoke. She stepped through the shadow as though it were nothing more than mist on a river. The whispers became gasps. The gasps became shouts. Across the galaxy, fear spread like fire. What power was this? What hidden strength did the humans carry in their fragile forms? The answer was not found in her muscles, not in her weapons, for she had none. The answer was in her eyes, in her calm, in her unbroken will. At last, she spoke again, her voice soft but reaching every ear. You believe power is what you hold in your hands. But true power lives here. She touched her chest. You cannot break what has already survived. The master's rage deepened, but behind his anger lay the seed of dread. He attacked again, his weapons swirling like a storm of dying suns. Fire, blades, shadows, lightning, ice, all of them at once. The arena shook. Towers cracked. The very ground of the duel threatened to split apart. His storm filled the sky, endless, merciless, unstoppable. She walked through it. Step by step, she advanced, her hands catching fire and turning it to ash, her arms slicing through blades and scattering them like glass, her body moving untouched through lightning, her feet leaving steady prints in the ground while ice shattered around them. The storm of weapons crashed against her like waves against stone, and she did not fall. The crowd screamed now, not with joy, not with cheering, but with fear. She cannot be stopped, voices cried. If one human can do this, what happens if they rise? In hidden war rooms across the galaxy, alien leaders exchanged urgent words. Armies were strong, fleets were vast, but what good were weapons if they could be caught by human hands? What good was fear if humans no longer felt it? The woman's voice rose again as she stepped closer to the master, her tone calm, almost sorrowful. You thought my kind weak. You thought suffering broke us. But suffering is what made us strong. We did not grow in peace, we grew in struggle. And that is why your power does not scare me. The master stumbled back, his breath coming hard, his fury cracking into fear. For the first time in all his victories, he saw defeat in his future. His weapons, his strength, his legend, none of it mattered. The human woman was beyond them. She was a living truth that none of his strikes could erase. The galaxy began to whisper her words, carrying them from one star system to another. Survival. Struggle. Strength. Across the void, Those who had ruled for centuries felt the tremor of something new, something dangerous. The humans were not prey. They were not weak. They were the hidden power waiting in the dark. The master cried out, summoning his army of weapons into the arena, dozens of glowing forms rising around him, each one a champion in its own right. The battle would no longer be duel against duel. It would be war inside the circle. And still, the human woman did not move with fear. She simply raised her hand, her eyes calm, her voice soft. Send them all. The crowd erupted in gasps, their fear louder than thunder, as the storm of champions closed in on her. And in that moment, the galaxy realized this was not the end of a duel. It was the beginning of something far greater, something they could not control, something they could not stop. The hidden human power had been revealed, and the universe would never be the same again. The arena shook as the master's summons was answered. Around him, dozens of forms appeared, champions drawn from the galaxy's most feared warriors. Each was armed with weapons that had ended civilizations, blades that had drunk the fire of stars, guns that had silenced empires. They filled the circle, towering over the single human woman who stood in their center. The crowd leaned forward, their whispers trembling into shouts. This was no longer a duel. This was war. The master raised his hand, and the champions advanced. Their steps thundered like falling meteors, their weapons blazing with fury. Firestorms swept the floor, shadows swarmed like living beasts, bolts of energy carved the air. The walls of the crystal arena cracked under the assault, towers shuddered, the floor split apart. To the billions watching, it looked like the end of all things. But the human woman did not move back. She did not hide. She did not fall. She stood tall in the middle of the storm and lifted her hand as the first champion came close. His blade, forged from the death of suns, fell toward her head. She caught it in her palm and shattered it into dust. The warrior stumbled, his roar cut short by shock, and with one strike of her fist, he was thrown across the arena like a broken comet. The second rushed forward, his weapon a cannon of burning plasma. He fired, the air twisting into fire that could melt ships, but the woman stepped through the blaze. Her hands cut through the flames, scattering them like smoke, and she struck the cannon apart as if it were made of wood. The third charged, a creature of steel and stone, heavier than a mountain. She leaped, her foot striking the giant's chest, and the monster fell to the ground, the floor shattering beneath his weight. The arena filled with chaos, weapons colliding, fire bursting, walls trembling. Yet everywhere she moved, she broke their strikes, turned their weapons to nothing, and sent their strongest warriors crashing to the floor. Her body flowed like water, her strikes sharp as lightning. She was not faster than them, not stronger than them in muscle or bone. But she moved with a certainty, with a calmness that no storm could shake. She fought not like a soldier but like someone who had carried the weight of survival all her life. The crowd screamed now, their voices echoing across the galaxy. In markets, in towers, in war councils, entire worlds leaned forward in disbelief. Some shouted her victory, their voices rising in awe. Others whispered in fear, warning that this was a shadow of something greater. Across the stars, leaders exchanged grim glances. If one human could fight like this, then the galaxy was facing a truth it had never prepared for. The master himself grew more desperate. He hurled commands at his champions, demanding they fight harder, demanding they break her. But their weapons failed, their power crumbled. One by one, they fell around her. The floor was littered with broken weapons, shattered armor, and defeated giants. The human woman stood alone among them, calm as ever, her chest rising steady, her eyes fixed on the master. He stepped back, his pride cracking, his certainty fading. He had thought his army of champions would drown her in fire and steel. He had thought numbers would succeed where power had failed. But she stood untouched. And the crowd knew the truth. This woman was no longer just a challenger. She was a force the galaxy could not deny. At last, she spoke, her voice soft but cutting through the roar of the crowd. You think strength is measured by the weight of armies. But armies fall. Empires crumble. Weapons fail. True strength is the will to endure when all else is broken. Her words spread across the galaxy like a wave. In hidden chambers, alien leaders shifted uneasily. They remembered their wars against Earth, the countless ways they had dismissed humanity as fragile, broken, unworthy of respect. But now those memories burned with shame. Perhaps the humans had always been something else, something dangerous waiting to rise. The master roared again, his voice cracking with fury, his pride bleeding into fear. He called upon his final reserves, a weapon so vast it was said to consume the life of stars. The arena trembled as the weapon took shape above him, a sphere of burning darkness, glowing with power beyond measure. The crowd gasped as the light spread across the crystal walls, flooding the air with dread. This was no longer sport. This was destruction, the kind that erased worlds. The woman did not step back. She did not raise her hands in fear. She simply lifted her head and looked at him, her eyes steady, her voice calm. Do what you must. But know this, you are not fighting me alone. You are fighting the truth of humanity. And truth cannot be destroyed. The sphere pulsed, its fire building, its shadow spreading. The master poured every drop of his rage, his fear, his pride into it. He would end her. He would end this threat before it grew beyond his control. The crowd screamed as the weapon reached its peak, brighter than suns, darker than black holes. And then, with a cry of fury, he hurled it toward her. The arena shook, the galaxy held its breath, and the woman raised her hand to meet the storm. The weapon fell like a collapsing star. The sphere of burning darkness roared across the arena, swallowing light, bending sound, filling every corner with the taste of death. The walls of crystal cracked, the towers shook, and the crowd screamed as the shadows spread, drowning them in dread. Across the galaxy, billions watching through their screens leaned back, shielding their eyes as though the weapon could reach through space itself and burn their worlds. This was no duel. This was the end of everything. The human woman did not move back. Her body stood straight, her eyes unblinking, her hand rising as the storm closed in. When the weapon struck her palm, the world shook. The floor shattered, towers split apart, shards of light shot into the sky. The sound was like thunder tearing through mountains, a roar that reached the farthest stars. For a moment, all was fire, shadow, and silence. The crowd thought she had been erased, swallowed by the master's final fury. But when the storm cleared, she was still there. Her hand held the burning sphere as if it weighed nothing. The shadows wrapped around her, but they did not consume her. The fire pressed against her skin, but it did not burn her. She stood in the wreckage, calm, unbroken, her eyes steady on the master. And with a slow movement, she pushed the weapon aside, its power scattering into sparks that vanished into the air. The silence was unbearable. Not even the wind dared move in the arena. The master staggered back, his face pale, his eyes wide. His weapon had failed. His power had failed. Everything that had made him a legend had shattered before the calm defiance of one human woman. She stepped forward, her voice soft, but carried by power stronger than any shout. You do not understand us. You have never understood. You think pain weakens us. You think suffering breaks us. But pain is our teacher. Suffering is our fire. We are not shaped by peace. We are shaped by struggle. And it is struggle that makes us strong. Her words spread across the galaxy, reaching every world, every council, every hidden corner where the duel was being watched. On warships, alien captains lowered their heads. In markets, crowds fell silent. In the chambers of rulers, hands tightened on thrones. The truth was clear now, spoken through her defiance. Humans were not fragile. They were not prey. They were survivors, born in fire, grown in storms, sharpened by endless battles for existence. The master shook his head, refusing the truth, his voice breaking with rage. No. You are nothing. You are insects. Your kind will always crawl beneath us. He drew another weapon, desperate, wild, his body trembling with the weight of fear. But when he charged, she caught it with ease, snapping it in her hand like brittle glass. She did not strike him. She did not kill him. She only looked into his eyes and spoke again. You think I am the strongest of my people. But I am not. I am only the first to stand here. I am only the beginning. If you fear me, then you should fear what is coming. Because I am not alone. Humanity is rising. The crowd erupted, their fear bursting into chaos. Some screamed in denial, others whispered in awe. Across the galaxy, leaders turned pale, their thoughts racing. If she was telling the truth, if humans were all capable of such strength, then everything was about to change. The balance of power, the control of empires, the order of the stars, all of it stood on the edge of collapse. The master's pride shattered into silence. His weapons fell from his hands, clattering to the broken floor. He stared at her as if she were not a human but something far greater, something his mind could not grasp. He had ruled by fear, by the certainty that no one could resist his power. But now fear belonged not to her, it belonged to him and to the galaxy. The woman stepped closer, the light of the broken arena shining across her face. For too long, you have called us weak. For too long, you have ignored us. But weakness is an illusion. Fear is an illusion. The only truth is this: we endure. And those who endure cannot be destroyed. Her words burned into the hearts of all who heard them. On distant worlds, children whispered her name. In council chambers, rulers struggled to hide their terror. Armies paused their drills, staring at the screens in silence. Humanity had revealed itself, not with fleets, not with armies, but with one woman who refused to fall. The master dropped to his knees, his voice broken, his body trembling. He could not understand it, but he could not deny it. The galaxy's greatest warrior had been defeated, not by strength, not by weapons, but by the unbreakable will of a human. The crowd remained frozen, their hearts torn between awe and dread. For in that moment, everyone knew the truth: this duel had changed everything. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The legend of humanity had been revealed, and it was only beginning to spread. The woman stood above the broken champion, her gaze steady, her voice calm, her presence unshaken. She had not come to destroy. She had not come to conquer. She had come to show the truth. And now, the truth was free. When the light of the shattered weapon faded, the arena was silent. The floor was broken, the towers cracked, the air still filled with the smoke of ruined fire. Yet in the center of the wreckage stood the human woman, her body calm, her hand empty, her eyes steady. Around her lay the fallen champions, their weapons shattered, their power broken. And before her, on his knees, was the weapons master, once the undefeated, the terror of galaxies, now bent and trembling, his pride turned to ash. The crowd could not speak. Billions watched through their screens, their voices caught in their throats. They had expected glory, they had expected another victory, they had expected the human to be crushed in seconds. But now they stared at a truth none of them had imagined. The greatest warrior had been defeated, not by a fleet, not by an empire, but by one human. The woman raised her head and looked at the cameras, her gaze piercing through the walls, through the stars, through the screens that carried her image into every corner of the galaxy. She did not shout. She did not roar. Her voice was calm, but it struck deeper than thunder. Now you know what humans are. Her words traveled like fire, burning across the galaxy. On distant worlds, people repeated them in whispers. On warships, soldiers lowered their weapons. In councils of rulers, silence fell heavier than stone. The galaxy had laughed at humans, had dismissed them as fragile, as weak, as prey. But that illusion had ended. A single woman had shattered it with her hands, her eyes, her defiance. The weapons master lifted his head, his face pale, his voice weak. You cannot rise. The galaxy will never allow it. You will be hunted. You will be crushed before you spread. But the woman only looked down at him with calm pity. Fear belongs to you now. Not to us. Not anymore. Her words struck harder than any blade. The crowd gasped, the rulers watching turned cold. Fear, once the weapon of the master, had shifted. It no longer rested on humanity's shoulders. It now spread across the galaxy, gripping the hearts of those who had ruled without challenge. The master bowed his head, his weapons fading into nothing. His legend was broken. And in that moment, the galaxy understood that power had changed hands. Humanity had stepped into the light, not as victims, not as slaves, but as a force that could no longer be ignored. The woman stepped away from him, walking across the ruined arena. Her steps were soft, steady, unhurried. She did not celebrate. She did not raise her hands in victory. She did not need to. Her victory was already written in the silence of billions, in the fear that spread through the stars. On a distant mining colony, a child whispered, "She is one of us." On a great warship, a captain muttered, "If one human can stand against him, then fleets will not be enough." In a council chamber, an emperor's hands shook as he whispered to his advisors, "The age of humanity has begun." The woman reached the edge of the arena and stopped. She turned once more, looking over the wreckage, the fallen warriors, the broken master. Her voice rose again, soft yet carrying farther than any shout. "We do not seek war. We do not seek conquest. But if you bring us chains, we will break them. If you bring us death, we will endure. If you bring us fear, we will return it." The galaxy trembled at her words. Armies hesitated. Rulers doubted their power. For the first time in centuries, the future felt uncertain, and that uncertainty carried a single name: humanity. The master's head sank lower, his pride gone, his legend destroyed. He had launched his deadliest strike, and it had been caught mid-air by hands that did not fear. The crowd would remember this forever. The galaxy would remember. And from that moment on, every empire, every fleet, every ruler would think twice before calling humans weak. The woman lifted her eyes one last time, her gaze steady, unbroken. The time of silence is over. The time of fear is over. The time of humanity begins now. She turned and walked away, leaving the broken arena, leaving the defeated master, leaving a galaxy trembling in her shadow. And across the stars, billions of voices whispered her truth. Humans were no longer forgotten. Humans were no longer weak. They were the survivors, the unbroken, the fearless. And in the silence that followed, one truth rose higher than all others. Fear no longer belonged to humanity. Fear belonged to the galaxy. The duel was over, but its echo had only begun. Across the galaxy, in halls of crystal, on ships of steel, in markets of dust and shadow, billions replayed the moment again and again. The strike launched, the hand raised, the weapon caught, the silence that followed. Every race, every empire, every ruler watched with wide eyes and tight hands. What had once been entertainment had become prophecy. What had once been spectacle had become fear. In the high council of the Dravari Dominion, ancient rulers hissed among themselves. "If one human can resist him," said the first speaker, his voice quivering, "then humanity may rise beyond us." His advisors argued, some urging immediate war, others whispering caution. But behind their voices lay the same truth: the galaxy had underestimated Earth. On the warships of the XYTH clans, generals stared in silence. These were warriors who had never feared battle, who had burned worlds for sport. Yet now their hands shook as they remembered her calm eyes, her steady voice. One spoke at last. "Our weapons are worthless against those who do not fear." None answered him. None could. In hidden markets on lawless moons, whispers turned into fire. "Did you see it?" one trader cried. "She caught his weapon. She broke his army." In the shadows of the crowd, human slaves lifted their heads for the first time in years. Chains felt lighter. Hope felt heavier. A whisper grew among them, a single word spoken with new power: freedom. On Earth itself, the people gathered in cities, staring at the sky, their screens glowing with the moment replayed again and again. Some wept. Some shouted. Some stood silent with hearts pounding. They had been forgotten, dismissed, treated as weak by the galaxy. But no longer. The image of one woman catching the strike of the galaxy's greatest warrior had lit a fire across the planet. For the first time, Earth believed in itself. The weapon's master did not rise again. His legend had ended in silence. He was carried from the arena, broken not by wounds but by shame. For the rest of his life, he would be remembered not for his victories but for his defeat at the hands of a human. And his silence would echo louder than any roar. But the woman, her name still unknown to most, did not stay. She walked from the arena, her head steady, her voice calm, her presence unshaken. She did not seek crowns. She did not seek thrones. She did not need them. For her victory was already greater than any empire. She had given her people something more powerful than weapons. She had given them a legend. And legends cannot be killed. In the days that followed, the galaxy trembled. Armies trained harder. Rulers whispered of war. Spies were sent to Earth, searching for answers. Was she the only one? Or were there more like her, hidden in the shadows, waiting to rise? None could say. The galaxy no longer looked at humanity with laughter. Now they looked with fear. But fear is a dangerous seed. It grows into caution. It grows into hatred. And it grows into war. Already, plans were forming in secret. Some empires prepared to crush Earth before it could rise. Others debated alliances, whispering that it might be better to stand with humanity than against it. The woman's words still rang in their ears: "We do not seek war. We do not seek conquest. But if you bring us chains, we will break them. If you bring us death, we will endure. If you bring us fear, we will return it." Her truth was no longer confined to the arena. It spread in whispers, in songs, in prayers, in shouts across the stars. Children of alien worlds dreamed of her. Human slaves whispered her strength in the dark. And rulers, in the deepest hours of night, wondered if their empires had already begun to fall. The galaxy had changed. A balance older than memory had been broken. And in its place, a new shadow rose, not of weakness, not of silence, but of humanity. And somewhere, on a quiet world far from the center of power, the woman stood beneath a sky of unfamiliar stars. She looked up, calm as always, her eyes steady, her voice silent. She knew the truth. This was not the end. This was the beginning. Because fear no longer belonged to her people. Fear now belonged to the galaxy. And the galaxy would learn, one way or another, what it meant when humanity rose.